Hey, so I wanted to actually take a look at Imperator Room, which has been, personally, for me, a pretty big disappointment. I don't mean to say that I came into this, just hoping it would suck or something. I just really wanted it, and this might just be my personal feeling, but I did hope that all of these complex systems, like the pop mechanics, the increased amount of provinces, the internal politics, would be really fleshed out, and that because there were all these really concrete systems, that we wouldn't see the same level of abstraction that we saw in EU4 and then in HOI4. And so I got really excited hoping for that. And then I started seeing all of these posts from Paradox and made it clear that they were planning on re-implementing mana, just like they had in EU4. And I started getting worried. Um, and so I started playing it, and I was thoroughly disheartened to find out just how much the mana elements ruined the game. So, in fact, let's just pull up Paint here. Obviously, Paint is the most professional software whenever you're talking about making charts and diagrams. It's the only one you really need. But I'm going to outline a few things that I thought were really hampering the game in terms of how they handled mana. I see I've lost a lot of people here, but so let's focus in. Firstly, when it comes to your pops, you have pop promotion, right? And pop promotion is primarily handled with mana. In fact, that is one of the only ways you can actually promote pops and actually choose which ones get promoted. So it gets a giant X for that because you're doing that with oratory power, right? And that's the other thing. I want to make a note here that not only does this game have a lot of mana systems, but they're really unbalanced. Like, you don't use religious power for anything other than sacrifices, which just happen every 5 years, and you're never going to not have enough of it for conversion. You just have such an abundance of it because there's no competing uses for religious mana that it doesn't make any sense existing on its own. But for example, here you use oratory for all pop promotion. You use it for fabricating claims. You use it in just so many contexts that it really doesn't belong in. But if we are going to keep pop promotion with oratory power, the part that upsets me is that there is no consequence. So let me write like a little cons here. Yeah. No consequence. So, for example, there is a tyranny system in the game, and that would be a perfect example of when a tyranny system would be really, contributing to the experience. Because think about it. For example, in real life, whenever Julius Caesar actually became dictator and consul, one of the things that he did that was considered tyrannical and really a big deal at the time is that he promoted a whole bunch of ethnic groups that were not Romans, so ethnic Gauls, for example, to become, senators. So there should be a tyranny system instead, and it should be a large amount, and it should be multiplied by whether or not the person is from the correct culture group or not. So, and that still doesn't quite factor it in, because honestly those Gaelic senators were actually, culturally Roman. They were just ethnically wrong, which is something that this game can't quite handle, which is probably for the best. But so my solution, and this is the worst chart ever, by the way, but solutions. Use get tyranny for promoting pops. And the other big problem is pop conversion. There is, again, no consequence for converting pops. So you don't, while you have the correct problems with it whenever you're converting a pop by using your governor, you have no such malice whenever you're just clicking and spamming the convert button, which is so broken. You basically have the choice of someone who will automate your clicks, but it will punish you with unrest, or you just click and you don't get any unrest. So, conversion should be, if you are going to be handling it with religious power, and let me write this down, and let me be clear. For a lot of these, the problem is constantly no consequence, because there is usually a version of the decision you want to make that has consequence, that is a choice you have to make, and a version that just doesn't. And that's not a balanced system. You're not making a choice between two good options. You're only making a choice between an option that is bad and an option that is good but kind of annoying. So that's just not that's not something I think contributes to creative thinking and strategic thinking. So you should get tyranny. Actually, no. That's the other thing. The way that I envision this, and this is a personal decision, and I do not hold it against the game developers, but I believe that in the mod I'm going to be making, I'm going to be changing the effects of tyranny so that tyranny has a much harsher malice to the happiness of citizens of your culture group, as well as a slightly softer malice to freemen of your culture group. And I'll review for balance reasons whether or not it should also affect tribesmen. But the whole point of tyranny is that the lower classes shouldn't really give a shit. It does not affect them. They are already under a tyrannical system when they live in a slave empire. However, it does matter a lot to your actual ruling class whether or not they feel like they have a say in your government. So they will get offended by any decisions you take to remove their privileges or rights. So instead of getting tyranny for converting pops, you will instead get serious province unrest for trying to convert, plus convert will be an attempt. And so the way that I'm envisioning it is that you have two choices. Either the governor, who will give a flat, um, province-wide chance to convert, as well as an unrest malice, or you can click on the button yourself and incur higher province unrest, and it will still only be an attempt to convert. And so I'm thinking it should probably be by a decision, but it will use religious power and it will go slightly faster. So you have the option of paying with religious power to take a chance on doing a mass conversion. So if there's anyone actually actively watching right now, please feel free to post a comment if you have any ideas or suggestions for the ways that you want the game to work. And right now I'm just focusing on pops because I feel like they're a great example of what's generally my problems with this game, where there is a system built in that showed thought was put into it that could be fun and organic and engaging. And then they decided, why don't we just say no and replace that with an added-on, slapped-on addition of this mana system that just feels like a different game. It feels so out of place, and it just does not mesh well in the ways that, it might have. Even in EU4, I was not a fan of it, but I thought that Diplo power was useless there. Religious power is ridiculously useful here. And like in early dev diaries, they were talking about how, well, you could, promote certain pops using this power and other pops using this power, which was kind of dumb, but at least it made other powers useful. But in this one, promotion is always the same oratory cost, with slight cost differences if you change policies for certain pops, but it's always oratory. And furthermore, there's no consequence to promoting people, and second of all, there is no benefit to converting people. There is no opinion malice for religion, and because you're likely to just accidentally have a governor who's the wrong religious type, and you can't try to convert him or else he loses 40 loyalty, there is a pretty good chance that by trying to convert them, they will just become less happy, not because you tried to convert them, but because they're your religious group, which is insanely broken. Like, there's also no way for you to know this beforehand, which is really bad design. And there's no implication that this could be the case or that you have to consider this. It's just something that randomly happens, which it does not feel thought through. It's just an example where this mana system just did not seem to come about from the natural process of the evolution of this game design, and it seemed like Johan was just like, smack it on. It'll be funny and meme-worthy. So promotion is bad, conversion I don't feel is good. And again, I do think that there is a place for using mana in these systems still, as some sort of abstraction, but that's where you should be inquiring tyranny, not for changing, your governor's policy. So governor's policies, I think, should be free to change. And if anything, so let's put this down. Policy, right? If we're going to have any sort of cost for governor policy, instead of that also being oratory, which by the way means that the only power you will ever use to promote, whether by governor or by yourself, is oratory power, which is also what you use to bribe for whatever reason. That's going to go in this version. But, so, my problem here is not even that it has no consequence, but instead it makes certain choices unnaturally bad. So it's just bad to choose a policy. Like, there's no benefit to it, since you can just do whatever the policy is doing with some random clicks and you won't get any malices from it. So adding malices, big ones, to your power will make using your power something you have to worry about, which is important if this is going to be a strategy game. You have to make the choice between the safe decision of just policies, which still rile people up but are less of a gamble, or actually mobilizing your entire government and all of your clout to make these decisions. And so this is why you don't use paint for this, but I'm just going to write it in green underneath here. But my solution to policy, so at least the one I'm going to be looking at, is policy change cost is based on governor loyalty and effectiveness based on finesse and finesse or their other powers. So what I mean by this is that I'm going to try to make traits more important for actual policies, so that instead of, conversion being based off of, I believe, just finesse, that should be based off of the religious power and abilities of that governor. And oratory power should be important, finesse should be important for different policies, so that each policy requires your governors to have certain skills. And then your loyalty with that governor should be a multiplier, or there should be a multiplier that is subtracted by the loyalty of your governor that will affect the cost in terms of oratory power that it requires for you to get them to do what you want. This was a pretty terrible decision to use paint for this. So I'm just going to go to docs, and we're going to ignore that script, right? So let me do these as sections. I'm sorry, I didn't really have too much of preparation going into this. I just really wanted to make this video and get started on the process of modding this game, because I really want to like it. There's a lot going on in it that I really want to enjoy, and I feel like it just gets shot in the foot by some terrible design choices that seem to just not arise naturally from it. So pops, right, which is going to include promotion movement, I should include movement, conversion, growth, what else can you do with them? Promote, convert, move, and there's another one. Another thing you could, assimilate, which is so bad. Alright, so for promotion, like I was saying, cons. No consequence to using Alice solutions. Get tyranny based on pop. Get tyranny for promoting pops as well as for more tyranny if they're the wrong culture group. Alright, for movement, cons. Why is there no consequence to massive forced migrations of people? Solutions. This should cost a large amount of tyranny based on your centralization, civilization, and your government type. This should also increase unrest in the new city that the people have moved into. And of course, this is all going to tie into the idea that we need a new system to actually make the amount of pops supported in a region make sense finally. So currently, starving pops seems to be pretty random, when in reality it should be pretty common of a problem. It should be based off of supply limits, so it should be worse in the winter. It should be not really a problem for slaves necessarily. There should be a higher cap for tribesmen than there are for freemen, because you have to imagine that these freemen are both, small-time farmers out in the countryside that have set up shop, or they are people living and working in a Roman city. And either way, especially in Rome, they are going to be pushed out of the way by rich patricians who own slave plantations. So the only reason that they, are your manpower is because they risk being homeless and not being able to support themselves otherwise. So in order for any of that to make sense, in order for moving pops to actually make sense, it should, starvation should be really based off of whether or not your pops can, be supported in one city or another. And so I'm thinking that there should be a cap on, the number of citizens and freemen that can live in a city based off of its supply limit, and that there should also be like a certain number of freemen possible versus like the total number of pops in a city. Like that there's a max number of pops possible in a city before freemen simply start starving or start leaving or just become useless to your society. So then for conversion, first of all, cons, no consequence. Counterintuitive, poorly balanced. So instead, solutions, governor, religious power, or whatever that trait is called. I've forgotten. Power traits should increase conversion policy effectiveness. The citizens with the wrong religion have a small chance, based on policies of the government, to convert on their own. Conversion by mana should be a decision in regions that have a majority religion that is not correct. This decision should be only available based on certain policies. It should take a time to complete, and it should only have a certain success rate per pop, and it should cause a large amount of dissent. All right. Growth. Cons. Currently, it's pretty random. You can't make policies that increase the likelihood of specific pops growing. Pops don't change, convert, promote, or assimilate naturally, and you need to do it for them. So, solutions. Again, I believe that one of the obvious ones would be to have a pop cap for Freeman based on policies and supply limits and total population in each city. A chance to convert based a chance to convert based on policies, chance to assimilate based on policies, and when I say policies, I mean like government laws. So what I mean specifically is that planning is something I never do. I always just want to make simple features, but while searching files, I find interesting stuff and I can't resist. I normally do that. That's what I did. I don't know why I'm typing this out. What I mean to say is that I normally do that. That's what I did with my Guy's Expensive Wars mod and with several other things in the past. But it's been a while since I've modded any game, and I feel like this time I really want to go into it with an idea of how I want to forge this game and what sorts of decisions I actually want to make down the road. And one second, let me mute this. Sorry about that. Alright, so chance to assimilate, and I'm not even sure about chance to promote. I mean, I guess with certain policies, you should have specifically a chance for tribesmen to promote to freemen. And maybe if you have a debtors system where freemen can convert back to slaves, but just because, especially during this period, classes were not very fluid. So, if you're going to have people, promoting or demoting, you don't want slaves to just sort of randomly do it, at least not on a large enough scale. You don't want necessarily freemen to just become citizens. That doesn't really make too much sense. But tribesmen becoming freemen, and vice versa, based off of civilization level centralization and policies, that I think just makes it feel a little bit more naturalistic. Otherwise, you should choose a specific governor policy like social mobility. Alright. Now let's take a look at assimilation. Perhaps the most nefarious out of all of these cons. 0 consequence for what is either genocide or total acceptance of new people. I'm sorry, new ethnic groups. People should not just assimilate because you pressed a button. In fact, the assimilate mana, the little thing you can press, it says assimilate for citizens. Maybe that should continue to exist, but I think it should just be changed to enslavement. Because there is no, either that or just, massacre, which is, I don't want that in a game. That to me would not be fun. If you just use some military points and you're like, oh, I just exterminated the local population. Ha 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 ha. That's gross. It is Roman, but it's gross. And more importantly, I think you already have the ability to raise cities, so instead, I think that should be changed to enslave, and you can then, have the population become a slave and move them around. But it does not make sense to just be able to press assimilate at the touch of a button, and everyone just goes with it. Even if you're acquiring tyranny for it, that does not make sense. What you should have instead, so solutions. I'll put a few possibilities. Enslave with mana uses military and oratory. Massively increases unhappiness due to different culture. And the other option should be to have a decision to accept another culture group as being inherently similar, assimilated. So by that, I mean having a decision that essentially, since there is no such thing as accepted cultures in this, something that will, for the cost of some tyranny and some oratory power based off of a few modifiers that I'm considering right now, planning out, I think that you should be able to simply accept and assimilate the entire culture group at once, and that cost should be based off of your aggressive expansion, potentially stability based on aggressive expansion. I'm trying to think what else would sort of be a good clue as to whether or not this other group is really assimilated or not before you even make this decision. And I'm thinking that the other one would be it has to be something calculable. I don't want to do percentage of citizens or even percentage of population, because that doesn't really add up necessarily, especially with, ancient slave empires. So instead, it could be based off of, the cost could be based off of aggressive expansion, stability, and wrong culture group happiness. And actually, yeah, we'll just put percentage of population, because that'll just affect the cost, right? And this decision should exist for each wrong culture group, right? And like, if you have higher aggressive expansion, it should be harder. If you have lower stability, it should be harder to accept them. And if they are a larger portion of your population, it should be easier to accept them. Alright? And then they will just all become your culture, because there is no longer a discernible difference within your nation between that culture and your own. Both cultures have changed enough in the eyes of your government, your population, etc., for this to more or less occur. There's still the problem that your population probably won't see it that way, but hopefully the tyranny cost should account for that. So, because the tyranny will more affect your higher class and your accepted pops, that should hopefully balance it out so that, you'll get feedback like, this was a tyrannical decision, we don't actually accept these people, so they hate you. So there's that. And I think those are probably the two ways I would like to have that dealt with. Alright. So then you always have the choice, like, are you going to accept this culture group now and face the costs, or are you going to, do it later and deal with the increased instability and unrest? Alright? So the next big item here, we've dealt with pops. Let's deal with else did I write down here? I'm not even going to write about policies. Let's just focus on military for the second part. There are a lot of problems with how that's handled in this, but let's just condense it down for a moment here. Alright, so tactics, cons. They are small bonuses against other tactics. So you really only choose tactics based on their bonuses to troop types. There's not really any choices to be made here based on how you intend to play. Just one good choice per army. You never know what your opponent will use, and you can't learn how to counter them. And so, solutions. This is a little bit trickier. I have not looked into the tactics system, but I believe that this is the way you could make, like, warfare a lot more fun, is just by messing with these. So, solutions: increase the bonuses of tactics against other tactics, and increase the importance of leader, what's it called? Fuck. Your sword power. I just want to learn what these things are actually called generally. Yeah, hold on. Okay, for example, here. I don't know why this would have a bonus against envelopment and a loss against phalanx? That doesn't make any sense. I would change that to begin with. It would be neutral against phalanx, but a lot less effective against envelopment or bottleneck. So, essentially, you should be really wary of just rushing in with shock action, because it should be a lot more dangerous if you get caught by someone who's going to trap you in a bottleneck. Not just minus 10% when you have a plus 100 unit effectiveness for heavy infantry, etc. It should be really dangerous, and it should also, like, Hannibal Barca used envelopment against a Roman shock attack at Cannae. That's like the classic example of tactics, trumping, superior numbers, etc. Why would this have a bonus against it? It should be a severe malice and a severe benefit. In fact, I would go so far as to say, in general, the against other tactics should be much more pronounced. So that instead of just like a little bit here, a little bit there, plus 25%, it should be one of the defining features of how you win or lose is who you're fighting against, what tactics they have. And so, in return, if you get defeated, and this is a really hard part, I don't know if this is tracked anywhere, but if you're defeated by an enemy, there's any way to track what tactics preferably, or failing that, what troop compositions they had, then you should get either a random chance a random chance for an event where you learn a counter to the tactics that you were defeated with, right? And that chance should increase based off of the amount of times that you've been beaten by that same tactic. You know, because think about it, with like Rome, they would get attacked by the Spaniards who were using the gladius, and they just couldn't, fight them back. But then eventually, they got beaten, and they learned, and they thought, hey, I like this short sword. We're going to take it and use it for ourselves. So they learned to counter to that. When they had been beaten by Hannibal a few times, they learned, hey, this is how we're going to counter him. And they were able to do so and defeat him, right? So there should be some sort of reward for actually caring about tactics. And, if it's possible, there should be some sort of, you should only be able to select certain tactics based off of your general's martial ability, right? Like, anyone can think of shock action. But not everyone could think through a bottleneck or envelopment, right? And so, if you're too low, there should be a chance that they just can't choose it. Not a chance that, if it's too low, they shouldn't be able to choose it, I think. That way, okay, good ideas, but your audio is so low. Okay, I'm sorry. What about now? Is this better? More events? Like nothing, yeah. Yeah, and you can't even really conquer everyone in a fun or satisfying way. You just sort of, the graphics and a lot of the design choices are just pretty interesting, right? But honestly, it just feels so let down by these really lackluster design choices. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the fact that you are going to just be conquering. It's that conquering doesn't feel rewarding. You never feel like, I made this choice, I fought outside of someone else, and so I beat them, You never feel like you're going uphill against someone. It just feels very formulaic. You just wait and then you click, right? And you have only one thing you're ever going to click, And I want to make it so that there's at least some challenge of like, what am I going to click? Am I, is this what is going to best help me achieve what I want? And so that's really what I'm hoping to bring about here. So, looking at land warfare, for example, I want to make tactics matter more against other tactics. That's where they matter the most. In fact, I might consider lowering the combat benefits for certain troops against other troops, so that instead you're more reliant on tactics for that rock, paper, scissor feel, right? And whoever has a new tactic has a huge benefit rather than some plus 25 that doesn't really matter. I mean, you get plus 25 if you just wait for 2 techs, you know? And I want tactics to feel exciting and, you know, important. So, let's see here. Let's try to see. Let's find out, for example, what is actually hard-coded. Stability, enact law, oratory, government bonus, assault, by invention. The fact that civic power is used for all inventions is so stupid. But whatever. I mean, that is the exact example of why, if you're going to have a mana system, you know, you balance them all out so that each one is needed to buy the inventions that are relevant to them. Not that they're all just civic, which doesn't even matter because you just sort of get enough civic anyway. The only thing you're really ever struggling to have enough of is oratory, because you're going to use oratory for all of the things you actually do in game. The fact that you can't even choose to, like, use other things in oratory for certain situations, but with the malice, even that's just a little bit more choice needed to actually make decisions. You never make a decision in this game as it is. Anyway, by idea. Military traditions. You know, military traditions, that's another thing. Military traditions could be a really interesting system, but the problem is that the benefits are really small compared to the amount of time that they take. So you're just waiting forever for these military traditions. They cost a huge amount of military power. And then you finally get them. And they don't do nearly as much as they should, right? Like for the barbarian tree, there is only one path that is worth anything because it gives you increased enslavement and it gives you increased slave output and it gives you a new tactic. Everything else is worthless. Like, they give you a small amount of manpower, but it's like 10%. You get that from, like, sacrificing the gods for like 5 years. It does not benefit you much at all. Nearly as much as its cost implies. So it just ends up being this massive military point sink because they realized that there is nothing else you use military power for. Assimilate pop oratory. This better not actually be hard-coded, right? Holy shit, if this actually is... Why is it called hard-coded as opposed to from script? I don't understand. So those are all the costs, but let's go back up here and see tactics. Or would it be under combat? Combat tactics. Here we go. So what I'm going to end up doing is going through this and changing these numbers so that there's just a large amount of damage to different systems based off of whether or not you are actually choosing the right tactic for the right opponent, and then hopefully I'll have to add a system later where you can spy on your opponent and find out, you know, what tactic they're currently using, right? And so let me write that down. Marshall. Add spying system to find out the opponent's likely Alright, well, that's going to be all for today. It's been an hour. It's been a good time. And that's currently my plans. Alright. I know this isn't the stream. Blah, 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 blah. Do you know how the character editor works? No, I don't. I haven't tried that actually. I haven't worried at all about characters because I have seen no use for them. They matter so little in how this thing works. Like, the only skill you care about is whether or not they have oratory power. And, like, maybe corruption. Everything else is useless. Their personality traits do not impact their relationships with other people. It does not affect their, like, subjects' loyalty. The only thing it impacts is, like, whether they get sick. And most of those traits just conflict with one another. Like, they don't make any sense, and they don't feel like you're playing as a person. You're playing as someone with a random set of stats that just contradict all the time. And it's just not fun. Alright. I guess I will. I'll try that. It does not seem engaging. But that's my plan for the moment. Alright, thank you for stopping by. All 4 of you have been pretty lovely. And hope you have a good day.